You say you want change. You've been around the hierarchy for a long time. You've been in the Scottish Parliament since 1999.
Yeah.
Where did the other leaders get it wrong, and why wasn't your discontent heard?
Yes, I'm glad you think you've been around the hierarchy. I've never felt I'm quite around the hierarchy. I have been in and out of cabinet. But I'll be honest with you, one of the reasons that perhaps I've not been more prominent is because I've always put the constituents first. The very first thing that ever happened to me in politics when I became an MSP was an issue, a big, huge issue about our local hospital, the Victoria. And the then Labour-led government was going to close A&E and move it to the Southern, which has now just happened, of course. And I thought this was a bad plan. And voted with my constituents against my own party, so then I had to resign and go to the backbenches and so on. The point I'd make there, though, is that I believe that's the way that politics should be practiced in Scotland, that when you're tested, you should put the people first. And I think what's happened in the Labour Party is that we sound, I'm not sure it's true, but we sound, and perception matters in politics, as if we put the Labour Party first. So we sound as if we're angry about the SNP, we're angry about the Tories. And a strategy that we've adopted has been, to simply oppose the Tories in a two-party system, which most of us were brought up in. You've basically got the Labour Party and the Tories. And if you're not voting Tory, then the alternative is the Labour Party. Well, that's clearly no longer the case in Scotland. It's a multi-party system, and there are many alternatives. And so just saying that the Tories are bad and expecting people to come and vote for you is not enough. You have to tell people what you stand for, and that's where we've lost our way.
It's really interesting that you talk about constituents and putting people first, because sometimes I think politicians forget that they're there because of their electorate. Ben Bradshaw said the other day when he was up campaigning that he was really struck in parts of Glasgow that when he asked people on the door, had they seen their MP, there'd been no on-the-door contact for decades, or since before 2012, by MPs, Labour MPs that represented them for decades. How has that happened? How has your party got to a position where the entitlement means they don't know who they're representing? Yeah.
That story, although I have to do, I do like Ben Bradshaw a lot. No, but it's not. I mean, it's how many times does a politician not go out and hear the line, "Oh, we only see you at election time"? It's not a new line, and it's not always true, if I may say so. I hear it, and I actually say to people, I was in your street last year, actually, or last week. Take my constituency. I've got 29,000 houses, 29,000, and lots of people in them. Yeah. If you just work out mathematically, you cannot possibly get around them all. But you certainly make yourself available to everybody through surgeries, online, whatever else, and in person you do roving surgeries and so on. If it was the case that our MPs were out of touch with their constituents, then we would deserve to have lost. I do not think that's the answer. I can think of examples such as Russell Brown is one that would spring to mind. You will not get a harder working, more assiduous, more conscientious person than Russell Brown. He probably, I'm sure he knocked more doors than any other politician in Scotland, local councillor or MEP or anything. He was your ideal constituency MP and very able. And he lost by a landslide. So I don't accept that was the reason. And in fact, if you look at the candidates, I'm not going to knock any of the candidates that were elected or the current MPs, but clearly they weren't as well known as the MPs. I mean, Douglas Alexander, Jim Murphy, these are very, very well known, high profile people who work hard. So I genuinely don't accept that argument that they weren't working hard, they weren't in touch. I think they were very much in touch. But there's a mood that's gone against us. And the word you used at the end, entitlement, that's the one that keeps coming back. And that's this idea that Scots think that we took them for granted. And again, just to come back to why, putting people first rather than our party first. If we stand up in Holyrood every week and we say, the various examples in recent months have been student support, the higher maths exam, queues at A&E, learning languages. If you say in each case that it's the SNP's fault, it just makes it sound as if you're using every single thing that happens to people as a weapon to hit the SNP with. And that what actually matters is that you feel bitter because you're not in power and they are, and they're always wrong and you're always right. Well, that clearly isn't the case. All parties make mistakes. Some are right, some are wrong. Not every single thing the SNP does is bad. So if your default position is that it is, people begin to discount you, and it reflects badly on you. And that's where we've lost our way. We've just stopped the art of being positive.
Is that a purely though about how you express yourselves. Clearly, as a party of opposition, you don't want to be celebrating everything the government's doing, otherwise they just continue where they are.
Yes.
Is that more about how you express your discontent with something?
No, how you express yourself is very important. If it was just about expression, it would be relatively solid. It's clearly more of an attitude, and being oppositional is a state of mind as much as anything else. So we need to snap out of that. But I do think that you can make simple changes. I would suggest, for example, if we're going to just on a normal press release, if it says that the problem is higher mass and it's all the SNP's fault, just take the word SNP out of it, or if it's about the Tories, just take the Tories out of it. Because the problem is the higher mass exam, the problem is Q's at A&E, the problem is student support, the problem is new housing. So who cares whether it's the SNP or not? People will make up their own minds. People can join the dots themselves. They don't need a politician to tell them whose fault it is. They know who's running the country. In fact, the SNP have been running the country for 8 years, and we haven't laid a glove on them. In 8 years, despite we're up there angry, shouting, whatever else we're doing, it's not working. So can I suggest that let's not be so angry, and can I also suggest that I am not going to be celebrating the SNP. I am going to be critical. This idea that, because I'm not going to be oppositional, I won't be critical. I will be very critical, because I think that they've adopted many Labour policies in our language, but I don't think they deliver. But I don't think it matters, whether I think they deliver. What really matters is whether the voters think. And I think we should be illuminating that. And the way to do that is to get alongside them and say, well, we'll work with you with this. We will try to support you. But if you're not delivering, then we're going to illuminate that.
One of the criticisms from people like me about previous Labour leaders is you have got into a position of opposing and criticising the SNP, but then not coming up with solutions. Mm-hmm. So, Joanne made a very brave speech about universal benefits, etc. Mm. But then we were all left saying, so what's the alternative? I mean, you have to also have some policies.
Absolutely. But do you know the funny thing? I'd have suggested at the last election we possibly even had too many policies. I mean, we had hundreds of policies. I think we had 150 policies in our manifesto. I can't remember. There's some enormous number. What's more important is that you have a clear sense of direction, and that people know exactly. This whole line is, the other cliche you're hearing a lot of is, we haven't left you, you've left us. So people are saying there's a disconnect between our policies and our values. Two examples I've given that I think get to the heart of that. One of them is not so important. It was the proposal to drink at football grounds. I don't know if you remember that, but the basic theory behind this was that I think that we were losing the votes of middle-aged men who go to football. They're all voting exactly, Glasgow man. They're all voting SNP now, and they all used to be Labour. What would win them back? If we give them a drink at football grounds, Well, there is an unfairness argument that you can drink at rugby and not at football and all these things. But the Labour Party is engaged on a mission to change Scotland's relationship with alcohol. That's our value, So, and we've got a whole policy process that is developing that. So where did this come from? So people think, you're just chasing our votes. That's not what you believe. You're just chasing our votes. Perhaps an even better example might be the council tax freeze, the centrally imposed council tax freeze. I've got nothing against. If local councillors want to freeze the council tax, that's their choice, because they're directly accountable to their electorate. And it was a very successful popular policy because people were feeling the squeeze. But you cannot impose that from the centre. At the moment, if councillors are just having to choose between one cut and another, and they've got no discretion, no control over their own finances, and that's wrong. If you believe in devolution, and that's our values, I want to propose that the answer to independence is devolution. Independence is not the right answer for Scotland. Devolution gives you total control over your life, but allows you to take decisions at the right level. So, take decisions at as local level as possible. But if we live in a shared economy, then share the decisions with the rest of the UK. Share defence. But if we control health at the Scottish Parliament, but we control housing at a local level, take these decisions. So if we champion devolution, you cannot have a centrally imposed council tax freeze. And these are the sort of ways where our policies, what we're saying in public, and our values aren't quite aligned.
It's interesting when you say about drinking football matches, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Now, if you're serious about devolving everything, where would your policies come from? I mean, I remember a similar one with Ian Gray coming up with the knife policy during the last election. Where will your policies come from? Will they come from these people?
Yes, and they will come from more. They will come from the voluntary sector, they'll come from the trade unions, they'll come from businesses, they'll come from the people of Scotland. One of the things I want to do...
What if they wanted a drinking at football matches?
We'll have a discussion and a democratic process. We're a democratic party. We used to have policy processes and conferences where you'd have an open, pretty, combative debate about these things, and you'd take a position. I think the process we've got at the moment, we've got a very good policy process, but the trouble is it takes everybody so far on a big journey and then drops them at the end, and then the policy is decided by the party hierarchy. And I don't like that. Now, there will be a case that somebody, and the leader and the team will, and the people who are up for election in some ways will have to sign off whatever the manifesto is. But you should say to people that in advance. You say that we are going to approve the manifesto in this way, but it is not going to be us telling you what it's in it. You're going to tell us, and then we'll take a decision. And your role, you should be able to follow your input from start to finish. And you should see at the end what it stands for. And I want to open up conferences to, not just to the members and supporters, so allow them to have their say. I want to have trade unionists come along and take part as trade unionist individual members, not just as block votes, which currently happens, or controlled by the union bosses. I want union members to come and be part of to come to local constituencies.
When Joanne left, she also made some pretty damning statements about the party headquarters and how it operated. You've also said that you want to get rid of that. What's so wrong with it? Why is it so bad?
Well, first of all, I didn't recognise. I think it's, again, this is about your own attitude. I have never looked over my shoulder to Westminster. I don't look for permission to say things or to express a view. And I don't think most people in the Scottish Labour Party do. The Welsh Labour Party, just to give you an example, have no difficulty about their own identity, their own autonomy, and they've got less devolved power than we have. So part of it is about your own attitude. But I have said that I will formally negotiate an agreement with the UK party just to recognise formally, to make sure that everyone recognises that we are an autonomous party, but one that chooses to be part of the UK, is proud to be part of a UK Labour movement. Now, we've got so much in common. But within the party itself, in Scotland, we've got Bath Street, which is the party headquarters, but the political centre of attention is in Edinburgh, in Holyrood, and it's just daft. And they are, although we've tried to make it work, it doesn't quite work together. So I'm going to suggest, I want to have one headquarters, and I did deliberately choose the words head office. It'll be a head office, it'll be based in Edinburgh, but we will have a devolved structure. We will have 8 regional offices. This might not be apparent to everyone outside the party, but one of the things that really annoyed me during the last election campaign was that our regional organisers were pulled from places like Aberdeen and Dumfries. Never had any, I don't want to be a party of the central belt of Scotland. I want to be the party for the whole of Scotland. I was born in the Highlands. There are as many Labour votes in the Highlands and Dumfries and Peebles and everywhere around Scotland, people who share those values, as there are in Lanarkshire and Renfrewshire and Glasgow. So we should be appealing to every single part of Scotland. And not only that, we should be going out and winning new votes, winning people, persuading people who don't have a Labour tradition to join us because we stand for them and speak for them. So it's important that the party structure reflects that. So,
actually, maybe the terrible defeat for you, the election, gives you an opportunity to say, actually, we don't need to be part of this. We can have autonomy in a certain way.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because I did say quite early on that there is an opportunity in this defeat. It's a terrible thing to say because it makes you sound insensitive. But the very fact we've lost all our MPs actually, for example, gives us a chance to reshape the party. We've been riven by hierarchies in the past. Within the party, there are MPs at the top, then usually actually constituency MSPs, then list MSPs, which is what a ridiculous divide that is, and then councillors, and then members. The foot soldiers, the ones who do all the work. And I think that's utterly damaging. All elected representatives should be on the same level, accountable to their local parties. The local parties should be in charge. The members should control the party. That's the whole point. The members should be in charge of it. So all the things I've suggested about restructuring the party are about ending those hierarchies of interests, ending the sort of dominance of either elected members or unions, which I think leads us into the situation of the Falkirk candidate selection. That kind of rivalry within the party leads into those debacles. And what you want is the members to be in charge, and the members to feel, all of you to feel that you own the party, to feel it's your party. Because if you're asking the public to trust you, you first of all got your own members to trust you. And I'm not sure that's there at the moment.
Do you think Falkirk, just because you mentioned, do you think Falkirk actually presented an idea for the party, that for you looking in at that, where Joanne perhaps should have been the person that should have dealt with things, and Ed Miliband did, that it really showed how Scotland was the branch office?
I think that it certainly was. You've seen Nadir. You know how many times people said, "Have you reached rock bottom yet?" You know, yeah,
going.
Absolutely. So yes. I certainly hope it was the Nadir. The thing about Falkirk is it's actually reminiscent for me for a time in Labour's past. That's why we used to do things. When I was selected for the Scottish Parliament, the only reason I was selected was because we had a totally open process. A totally open process. The party wrote out. This is what made me change from just being I was a TV producer, you know, and I'd been a member of the party for a long time, and they wrote this letter out saying, we're looking for new candidates, people who have never stood before, and they gave this odd list of occupation. You know, it was like, you know, gardener, housewife, doctor, you know, vet. Yeah, exactly. Yes, no, but it was a really odd list of occupations. It really struck me. But it made me think. It caught my, I thought, oh, you know, and it was the Scottish Parliament. That's what really inspired me. Yeah. So I put my name forward, but it was an entirely open process. You went for you filled in an application form. You had a panel. If you got through that, you got into a panel of elected, I think it was about 300 strong of candidates. Then you went to your local party. I think 14 of us went for Eastwood. You know, it was and I can tell you, I would not have been chosen if we hadn't had that entirely open process. Mm-hmm. So to go back to the kind of thing where people are trying to fix it for their candidate it really annoys me. But I think it's within our power. You know, I won't pretend to know exactly what went wrong in Falkirk. But I can tell you that will not be the process that we have under my leadership. Absolutely not. And I won't stand for that kind of behaviour.
What leadership skills do you think you need?
It's interesting you say that because I'd say an entirely different style of leadership. I mean, I know that we have... perhaps I don't like to be defined by what I'm against, but in this case, I'll say it's not going to be the sort of dictatorial, you know, do it my way or the highway, whatever it is. You know, it's absolutely not that. It's absolutely the model of shared leader. I use the term, I'm never too sure about it, but the idea of the leader as servant. You know, the whole idea is that you're not, you are the figurehead, the person that has to explain to the public why we are going the direction we are, what the vision is, the kind of Scotland we want to achieve, a more compassionate society, a decent society. But you are not the person telling everybody what to do. That's why I'm saying the members should be in charge of the party, we should be accountable to the people we represent, and even just in their style itself, top-down, you know, decision-making. You know, I prefer collective decision-making, collaborative decision-making, team decision-making, shared responsibility. There is so much talent in our party. You know, the idea that, you know, that it's only about the leader, I just don't recognise that at all. So I think that you work collectively. I don't like, there's been a number of examples of quite exclusive leadership in the past. There's, you know, you have the cabinet, then you have a kitchen cabinet. It drives me up the wall. So I like shared decision-making, shared responsibility, and a shared sense of purpose. And that's the whole point of the Labour Party. But that's very much my style.
Just on what that means in terms of top-down leadership, if you like. Jim Mahaffey said to me in 2011 that the reason the party had lost was because people couldn't answer the question, what does the Labour Party mean to me, or what does it stand for? He's since did 2 reviews, he's been leader, you lost another election. Yeah. Can you answer that question?
What we stand for, yes. And not only that, I'm not sure it's true. I genuinely think that most people in Scotland, they know what Labour values are. Do you know how many people who vote SNP who say, but I still share Labour values? They actually use those terms, which, by the way, is a hugely optimistic for us. You know, if people still self-identify with Labour values, even if they're not voting for us, that means that we possibly can win them back. I think Labour values are about building a better society, getting an economy that works for the people of this country, trying to build a decent society where you tackle discrimination, unfairness, inequality. But it's about success as much as anything else. This is why I think that sometimes people think we've lost our way. My colleague Alec Rowley actually had a really good line in his leadership, deputy leadership. He reminded us that the Jarrow marchers didn't march for benefits, they marched for jobs. And I thought that was a really good thing, because I think the Labour Party, because we will always fight for people who are underprivileged or vulnerable or poor, sometimes we get defined by we just become the party of welfare and benefits. That's absolutely not the case at all. And even at the last election, we spent so much time talking about 0 hours contracts and the living wage. Well, these are really important things, but that's not everybody's life. I mean, I want to talk about success. I want to talk about ambition, getting on. I want you to buy a house, have a nice life, to be prosperous, and to be able to sort of look after those around you. But to do so in a society where we all care for each other, where we actually look after each other in old age, where you can't be, where we shouldn't have food banks. I'm not against food banks. I'm not at all, because they're a sign of charity, of compassion. But it is shameful that we have food poverty. So a society where we care for each other so much and support each other, that doesn't need to exist.
You do keep saying you don't want to frame your argument against others, but you are against Kezia Dugdale for this. Why will you make a better leader?
That's right. There is a choice to be made, but I don't want to frame it against Kezia. People can judge Kezia for what she says and who she is. I've made a series of policy announcements to try and frame what I'm offering. And I do think it is different. It's not because Kezia said it, but it is different from the current direction we've been in and have been travelling in. So it's going back to, for example, the reason I stood for Parliament, about devolution. It's about sharing power with the people of Scotland. It's about being less partisan, more open, more optimistic, more forward-looking, less tribal, less aggressive in our politics. So one of the things that really depressed me in recent weeks and years is the language of politics in Scotland is so aggressive and so antagonistic, driven by social media, but actually there's an awful lot of personal politics too. I am not going to attack other politicians. I want other politicians in other parties to be the best they can be. I want them all to be good politicians, because it brings out the best in everybody. And so I don't want to be personal about it. And I certainly won't be attacking other politicians in my own party, which has happened in this leadership contest. So I'm not going to. It's generally not about my opponent. It's about the offer. But I also recognise Kezia has been the deputy leader, has been leading us in the Parliament for the last 6 months. People can work out the kind of leader she's going to be and how her approach is going to take us forward. I am definitely offering something different. I am offering a different style and a different strategy and different policy.
How important do you think it is that people have life experience before they become politicians?
Yes, this is my one boo-boo in the early on was I did say that I made a remark about Kezia. I undoubtedly think it's an asset to me and to everybody, in fact, to have experience. I have no doubt whatsoever. I can tell you that, to have become leader before you've even served a term, if I'd become leader before I'd even finished one term, before I'd ever represented a constituency, I don't know what kind of person I'd have been. I can tell you I have changed as a politician. The very fact that I see myself as a politician now, and I genuinely did not see myself as a politician for at least 2 terms. I thought I was a Labour Party supporter and believer and member who had had the opportunity to put himself forward and was fortunate enough and privileged enough to represent a seat and to make a difference. But I still assumed that I'll get elected, I'll get unelected, and I'll go and do something else. I love doing this, and I've got so much I want to offer and shape about our politics. But I know I'm not the person I was when I started. And if I may draw the comparison, I'm not sure if the audience will like this, Nicola Sturgeon is not the person she was when she was first. She was elected at the same time as me, and now look at her now. She's not the same person. And I think you do learn and you do mature. And I'm actually now far more clear about, not just about what I stand for, but what you can do. You're not totally in charge during politics. We always give the impression that, vote for us and this will happen. And it doesn't quite work that way. What you do is you set your vision, you set your target, you set the direction of travel, and then you try to take people with you. And you work with people along the way to get there. That's how you do it. The idea that we'll come in and we'll do this and things will be transformed overnight. It's not going to happen. But you can certainly make a difference. And you can take people and you can certainly change the country around and make it the country you want it to be, the more compassionate.
To be fair, we all change as we grow. But, when you say you've learned to be a politician, does that make you any less authentic?
I hope not.
Because that's a word that's used a lot recently.
Yes. Well, it's funny you say that, because one of the words that I would use about my own politics is integrity. One of the things, for example, that I think that people are finding so attractive about Jeremy Corbyn's campaign is he's clearly got integrity. He tells you what he stands for. He's not compromised. He doesn't take a position. there's too much in politics, and certainly in my own party, but I think in all politics, where you don't tell people what you stand for. What you do is you work out where somebody else is, and then you take a position to the left or right of them. Because if they're out there, then you can win all the votes to the left of them. And I think that's the Labour Party problem. We're too positional. And I'm not like that. I've got a very clear idea of what the kind of society, the kind of country, the kind of politics, the kind of policies that I want to see. That's why. I've actually said a number of policies, illuminated by with policies, which, I'll be honest with you, they're not. Well, I won't say they're not vote winners, but maybe their popularity is debatable. Another example would be votes for prisoners. But it's not votes. I'm not a reactionary, and I don't like the idea that we're in a party where we treat all prisoners as if they're rapists and murderers. They're clearly not. And if you want to live in a decent society and give people a chance and see the best in them, you can't treat them as if they're all the worst. So some prisoners who are non-violent, about to come out and come back in the community, you should treat them as if they're normal, responsible citizens, and perhaps that way they'll behave like responsible citizens. So these are the sort of policies, again, which reflect my values, and that's what you do. And I think if you're honest, that does offer authenticity. So I am quite direct. I've still not learned sometimes things not to speak about. But
that's good. Do you see yourself as the decent candidate?
Thank you, David. Yes. Well, I see myself as a decent candidate. Yes. Yeah. I'm not the only one. No, I don't think any of the other candidates are lacking decency. But I'd like to think that there's that decency is actually part of my campaign, in the sense that I want to build a decent Scotland. So it really matters to me that people behave kindly and civilly towards each other. I go back to Twitter or whatever else, but it utterly depresses me that people can be as rude and as vile as they are to each other just because they're sort of slightly anonymous behind these social media fronts. I know. I'm conscious of Mandy's profile on Twitter and her relations with the Labour Party. So, anyway.
I know we're kind of running out of time, but when I look at the SNP, and I've obviously interviewed a lot of people over the years around that. I interviewed Angus Roberts in 2007, and he really charted how they had sat down after 2003 and said, how do we become electable? And they were absolutely clear. It needed to be about positivity. I think that became a bit saccharine, but positivity, leadership, and have a message. Now, how far do you think you are from all of that?
Not far at all. I genuinely don't think we're not far at all. I think that what we've got to actually do is remove some of the distractions from our journey. Most people who join the Labour Party join it because they recognise we're on a journey. It is a movement. It's an incredibly powerful feeling to know that you share a sense of mission with people. And you only have to go to a few Labour meetings to recognise that so many like-minded people who get very animated about what's wrong with our society and how you could change it and how you could make it better and how you could lift people out of poverty and give them a chance and let them get on. And it's very powerful, it's very emotive. So I don't need to reinvent that. That's there. It exists. But perhaps we do need to remind people, and particularly younger people, to join us of the difference that each of us can make to the life we live and the society we shape. So that's all there. But what's got in the way is all sorts of things. We have become, I think, unfortunately, for a party of change, we've become the establishment, over the last 20 years, I don't know, at some point. Instead of being the us, we've become the them, bizarrely. For me, that's bizarre. So we've got to change that. Just remind ourselves that we are the party of change. We're the ones that are going to, challenge things that are wrong, that are going to take on the powerful and the vested interests that, that can damage our society. And perhaps strip back some of our policies to just messaging, and yes, be more positive. Yeah, I agree. Some of the tricks and techniques, I don't want a gimmicky approach to this, but I do want us to genuinely, every time we're saying something about any policy, if whatever the government's doing or other parties are doing, to not just criticise it, but to say this is what we do instead. To say, look. And to recognise where they're trying to do something, not to just condemn it, but to recognise and to be positive in that sense.
Another really basic thing for me was that the SNP, if Alex Salmond hadn't forbid, who had ever fallen under a bus. There were a number of people, not just Nicola, there are a number of people, and she has them underneath her too, who could step into the leadership shoes. Succession management doesn't seem to have been something Labour's done.
Well, well, you know, if you'd ask any of the Labour Party, would you want to have seen 7 different leaders in the last 5 years? No, you know. I've got very mixed feelings about that. Succession management. I do not want to choose the next leader of the Labour Party
but you want to
after me.
Talent, surely.
There's so much talent in the Labour Party. You know, there's all sorts of misunderstanding, I think, of either the ability in the Labour Party and on other parties' benches. You know, we have mixed ability in all parliaments and in all layers of representation. And that's the way it should be. You know, you have great orators and you have not so great orators. You have compassionate people and kind people and ones who are perhaps lacking a little bit there. You have very intelligent people, people who are perhaps necessarily less so. But the point is you've got a mix of humanity and a mix of the people of Scotland, all of whom are motivated by the kind of society we want to see, who are willing to work together and shape that, each one of whom has leadership skills of some form or another. You don't get elected without some form of leadership skill. You know,
but there's no denying there wasn't a queue for this leadership.
Yeah, but that's because people's heads were down. It was more to do with human nature. You know, it's...
just had enough.
It was a terrible defeat. I mean, I think that it's difficult. I'm not going to go on about the defeat because, to be honest, I want to talk about how we're going to rise again. But there's no doubt that, I mean, amongst my colleagues, their heads were down. I mean, really, people wanted to sort of slink off to the summer and lick their wounds. You know, there was no appetite. And that's still the human nature. That is what the party, I can tell, I'm phoning round. Many people in the party are still a bit disconsolate and down. And, you know, that's one of the reasons I'm standing is, for goodness sake, you know, stand up again, you know. We're not down. We still, even in this terrible result, we still got 25% of the vote. We got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of votes. So many people in Scotland want us to be strong again. They want us to do well. So we need to be strong for them. That's why I'm standing. I would have, a coronation would have been a disaster for us, you know. And I've got no doubt of the young talent in our party. There's people here today, by the way, who've just joined our party. I can tell you I can't say how encouraged I was, you know, to just after the defeat, to have young members at the next CLP, and clearly very talented and bright young members. So don't get embarrassed at the ones I'm talking about here. You know.
If you don't win, and you are you stand on the ticket for change, can you imagine leaving the party at that?
No, I've never understood that actually. You know, and people do, and I you know, so I recognise it happens. But then, you know, I didn't join the Labour Party to become a politician, and you know, if I happen not to be a politician, I certainly won't be leaving the Labour Party, because being in the Labour Party is more important to me than being a politician.
One of the other observations I have about the leaders that have gone, and I've known them all, is that they then don't ever seem to contribute to the wider debate after they've gone, and I've never really understood that. How do you try and get people to be more inclusive, come back in?
Yes.
Their intelligence.
It isn't, but there's obviously something there. I think it's difficult. I think that no one wants to be the ghost at the feast, do they? You know, no one wants to be the spectre hanging around. And so I think finding your role, finding that positive role after you've been leader, I think is very difficult, because you might be either overshadowing or everything you say might be misinterpreted as a criticism. You know, it's a difficult one. But some people will.
But as a leader, would you encourage that kind of bringing in of all minds?
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, you asked me if Kezia would be in the cabinet. Yes. Would Joanne? Yes. Would Ian Gray? Yes. So there. I'm naming my cabinet already, I know.
Jeremy Corbyn's already saying he'll do a deal with the SNP. I'm not sure what.
Did he say that?
Would you work with Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah, of course I would. Yes. Did he actually say that?
Yeah,
I don't think he did.
I don't know if he said what he said.
Yes, no. I don't think he actually said that. But yeah, no, of course I would work. One of the reasons I've not spoken about the national... I'm not going to tell anybody here or anybody in the Labour Party who to vote for in the leadership. Because it's not... there's too many people in the Labour Party trying to, you know, say, this is our person, you know, going way beyond this is our person, going way beyond these are shared values. They're actually attacking the other ones and saying pretty aggressive things. That's very damaging.
Kezia has already said who she wouldn't work with.
Yeah, well, see, I think that before you speak about other colleagues, you know, I wouldn't attack people in other parties the way that some people attack our own party. But that's the nature of the Labour Party, I'm afraid. Someone said the other day that, I read this survey, that the SNP members, if you criticise the SNP, they take it as a personal insult. I can tell you, if you criticise the Labour Party, most party members will join in with you. That's just what happens. So there's a different mentality there. But I don't think... I think before you say anything about any politician, and certainly one of your own colleagues in your own party who clearly shares your values, try replacing the name of that person with your name and see if you say the same thing. Because
I'm asking this because all the candidates down south have been asked this question. And she talks popularity polls. What characteristic that Nicola Sturgeon has would you share?
I don't know. I think she's a fairly genuine person. This might sound funny. I used to feel sorry for Nicola Sturgeon. I think it was tough being in the position she was, and I used to think she was a little brittle. Well, she's incredibly tough now, that's for sure. And she's very competent. Competent. She's a good example of why I want everyone to be good at their job. I want every MSP, every MP to be good, talented, strong, good debaters, up there speaking up for their party, and not personal. She's not personal the way that Alex Salmond was, not particularly. Well, if you...
Discussion to the bar, I think.
Yeah, exactly, yes. Yeah, but if you were to say something when Alex Salmond was First Minister, his first response would be, that's typical of you to say that, and immediately personalise it. I don't think Nicola's like that at all.
Just to, I suppose, get towards the end, because I'm sure there will be questions. You talked about, that there are people who perhaps voted SNP or may have voted yes, who are Labour supporters but feel uncomfortable with their SNP they've gone there. I know those people too. Yeah. And what they're saying to me is that they feel we can trust the SNP government, there's a competence there. It is about how you get those people back, how you inspire them. And I guess what I want from you is, how are you going to really inspire people? You've not been in government for a long time now. How do you move them away from them?
Well, as I say, the first thing to do is to stop attacking them. I just think that, to condemn everybody who's voting SNP as a nationalism, to attack nationalism all the time. People aren't voting SNP because they're nationalists. There will be some there, clearly, but that's not why the majority of people are voting SNP. Far from it. There's a whole lot of people voting SNP who don't even believe in independence, and they're voting SNP. So let's stop attacking. Can I suggest we should stop being obsessed with the SNP? Let's talk about Labour and talk about what we'll do, because we need to get the argument back onto the things that matter to us and the people. So that is social mobility, it's the economy, it's jobs, it's education, it's opportunity, it's success. It's not constitutional change. I can tell you this, you will not hear me talk about constitutional change unless I'm asked about it. Because that's not our agenda. It's just a way of delivering the change you want, that's all. And I think that if you put this more positive agenda, I actually think that people do share it. The benchmark for the SNP was set very low. All they had to do was prove their competence. In 2007, when they came in, they'd been so derided as a sort of bunch of ragtag army or whatever else. All they had to do was prove they weren't a disaster. Well, clearly they've done that. But it was a pretty low benchmark. We've actually gone the opposite. We've got to win people back. People used to trust us, and we've lost that trust. And the difficulty with that is that can be actually quite slow to win back. But I think that, by being clear, honest, decent people that we are, being straight with them, I think that's the way to do it. I'm not pulling the wool over their eyes, not chasing their votes, but just standing up for what you believe and what hopefully they believe. In the end, I'm going to believe that the Labour Party has the right policies and the right values for Scotland, whether people vote for us or not. And that might be odd, but I still think that's what you should do. Here's the choice. This is what we believe, and this is where we're going to take you. Our country, we still live in a country where, 600 people own half the land of Scotland. Where inequality in our schools is widening, the attainment gap is widening, health inequality is widening. This has nothing to do with the Tories at Westminster. This is our doing. This is our society, and we can do something about it. Where there's poverty, you don't have to go 2 miles here. And there's poverty in our doorstep in Glasgow. It's just ridiculous. And all of these things we can do something about. And I just think if we start talking about that, and not forget that, this will be good for you, this will be good for you, Mandy, and everybody in this room. You will have a great life under Labour. It's the way to build a country that It allows you to live a decent life and have everybody else around you live a decent life too.
Lots of people also say that there's not much difference between the SNP and Scottish Labour apart from the constitutional difference. Why wouldn't you work with them in a coalition if that was ever presented?
But the thing about these questions about coalitions and deals is they are entirely political questions. I don't think the public really... The only people that care about them are politicians and journalists and others.
You don't think people like that think actually it makes sense? Why are they always fighting?
Well, I think that what they would care about is if we started making deals and carving up votes before they've even been cast.
If it presented itself, is that something that you think you could consider?
I am genuinely not going to consider or speculate about deals or not deals, because implicit in the question is you're taking for granted that, first of all, you've been elected and that certain votes can be cast away. There's an assumption in it, which goes back to that thing about the Labour Party having a sense of entitlement and taking people for granted. You do not take any vote for granted until you've won that vote, and then once you've been trusted with somebody's vote, then you do something with it at that point. But you're totally honest with him. I'm not standing for election to make a deal with another party. I'm standing for election because this is the kind of society I want to build, the kind of country I want to see. And you tell people that if they trust you to do that, they'll trust you to exercise your judgment. But I will not rabidly attack other parties just out of political interest. I will assume that they want to do the best for this country until they prove me wrong by making mistakes, which all governments do, unfortunately. We all let you down. At that point, we step in and we say, this is what you should be doing. But I will not attack them. That will not be my default position. It will be to try and work together constructively.
Leader next week. Is there time to change things by May?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely, yes, I know. This is, again, what depresses me about some of the discussion in the papers and in the leadership debates, is that somehow, are we genuinely writing off next year's election? I mean, people's votes are more volatile than they've ever been. People change, which is, for the Labour Party, not such a good thing. You used to be able to weigh our votes, and it's still... I go to the door, we've been out in by-elections all last 2 weeks, and you go to the doors, it's the ones that encourage you most are not the ones, oh yes, I used to vote somebody else, now I'm coming to you. The ones that encourage you most are the ones that, I've always been Labour's son and I'm with you for, I mean, I know that sounds funny, but there's true Labour people, and I think, great, So, but those votes are few and far between. Far more people now fluctuate, they're volatile, they vote one party than another, and that means that they can be won back, and they will change, particularly if they, as I say, they share our sense of value and purpose.
Are you glad you've gone through this journey?
Yes. No, I am. Yeah. No, I am. I know.
A question for you. She said, "What's for dinner?" I suspect you probably don't know.
Yeah. No, I don't actually. Yes, I know. I am conscious I've ruined my family summer. Didn't go on the family holiday. I know that was not good. And Mandy, thank you. Thanks so much, Mandy. That's so good of you. Thanks, man.